I was only 9 years old when I woke up in a cold hospital room. The smell of alcohol mixed with the distant sound of machines surrounded me, but what frightened me most was the silence. I looked around, expecting to see the faces of my mother, my father, someone from my family, but there was no one, just white walls and a window fogged by the rain outside. My throat grew dry as time passed. I pressed the nurse call button repeatedly, asking where my parents were. I always received the same vague answer. They should be on their way, but hours turned into days, and no one showed up. I felt completely abandoned, as if I'd been purposefully forgotten. Fear grew within me like an uncontrolled flame. I wondered what I had done wrong to be left there alone. Children believe the world revolves around their mistakes, and I was no different. I spent entire nights crying, begging for someone to come and get me. As I stared at the door that never opened, I began to feel like a prisoner. Every time the dinner cart passed, I expected to hear familiar footsteps, but it was just strangers coming and going. I was surrounded by people, but more alone than I'd ever been. This abandonment marked my childhood like an invisible scar, and even after I was discharged, the emptiness inside me never disappeared. I spent years trying to understand why my own family had left me there, as if my life had no value. And before I continue this story, I want to ask something of you who are listening to me now. Share this story to reach more people. Subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment about where you're listening from. I'll be thrilled to read each comment. After that experience, I returned home, but I wasn't the same. My body was there, but my mind was still trapped in that hospital room, waiting for someone who never arrived. My family's silence about what happened was deafening. No one mentioned anything, as if it were just another unimportant detail. I kept asking, "Why didn't you come see me?" My father looked away, my mother changed the subject, and my brothers pretended not to hear. It was like talking to walls. This lack of answers turned pain into anger, and anger into an unfillable void. At school, when classmates talked about family visits during difficult times, I kept quiet. I felt ashamed to admit that no one had been there for me. I carried the feeling of being disposable, as if I wasn't worthy of care or love. It was a burden that crushed me day after day. Sometimes I wondered if I'd been adopted, and no one would tell me. Other times, I believed I'd done something terrible, and that abandonment had been my punishment. Children don't understand adult secrets. They just absorb the pain in silence. My life went on with that question hammering away at me. Time passed, but the memory of those cold nights haunted me like a ghost. The empty hospital room never left my mind, and the certainty grew within me that one day I would discover the truth. It wasn't until many years later, as an adult, that fate brought me face to face with a doctor who had been there at the time. And when he opened his mouth to speak, I realized the secret was finally about to come out, and nothing could have prepared me for what I heard. The years passed, but the emptiness of that childhood never healed. I grew up surrounded by a family that acted as if nothing had happened. It was as if the hospital had never existed, as if the abandonment were just a figment of my imagination. But I knew, my heart knew. Each birthday of mine became too silent, devoid of warmth, devoid of displays of affection. I looked into my mother's eyes, expecting some hidden answer, but found only coldness. My father retreated into work, and my brothers went about their lives as if I were nothing more than a shadow in the house. This silence shaped who I was. I became insecure, always afraid of rejection, always believing I wasn't enough. Friendships were difficult, because I carried a secret no one understood. How could you trust someone when not even your own family wanted to be by your side in a hospital? Memories of that room came to me in nightmares. I dreamed of doors that never opened, of distant voices that never called my name. I woke in the middle of the night, feeling like I was back there, alone, trapped in a place from which no one could rescue me. I tried to convince myself it was a thing of the past, but the truth is, every detail of that experience still burned inside me. It was an open wound that no one saw, but that bled silently every day. It wasn't until many years later, as an adult, that fate decided to stir up this past. I was at a routine clinic when an older doctor came in to see me. Upon reading my name, he paused for a few seconds, as if recognizing something distant. His eyes looked at me differently. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but when he started asking strange questions about my childhood, I realized there was more to it. He mentioned details no one outside my family would know: the hospital, my age, even the rain that night I woke up alone. My body froze. I tried to hide it, But curiosity consumed me. I asked directly, "You were there, weren't you?" The doctor sighed deeply, took off his glasses and said, "Yes, I remember you, and I need to tell you what really happened." My breath caught. I wasn't ready, but at the same time, I'd been waiting for this my whole life. The office felt small, the walls seemed to close in, and my heart was pounding so hard it could be heard in the silence. It was as if the ghosts of my childhood had entered that room with me. The truth was about to come out, and I trembled at the thought of what would come. The doctor leaned forward, looking deep into my eyes. That look held more than compassion. It held weight, as if it held a secret that had tormented him for years. And then he said, "Your family didn't leave by accident. They did it on purpose." His words cut through me like a blade. The ground seemed to spin beneath my feet, and all I could do was repeat in my mind, "On purpose, on purpose." The truth had finally knocked on the door, and I knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. The doctor took a deep breath before continuing. He seemed to struggle with his own memories, as if each word were too heavy. "Back then, I was a resident and followed your case. I saw your family leave the hospital, and I saw that they never came back." His voice held a note of regret, as if he had carried that weight for decades. My hands were sweating, and my whole body was shaking. I asked in a choked voice, "But why? Why did they leave me there?" He hesitated for a moment, but then added, "They signed a document saying they couldn't be responsible for you during treatment. It was a conscious choice." The words echoed inside me like thunder. My family hadn't been stopped. There hadn't been an accident. They had decided to abandon me. Anger surged like fire through my veins, mixed with a pain so deep it almost overwhelmed me. The doctor continued, explaining that at the time he'd found it strange, but that he was a young man without the voice to question adult decisions. He was watching me now with guilt-ridden eyes, as if he wanted to make up for what he couldn't prevent in the past with the truth. I was in shock. All that emptiness from my childhood, all that feeling of being unwanted, finally made sense. But knowing the truth didn't bring me immediate relief. It brought a storm that swallowed me whole. I left that office feeling as if the world had fallen apart. Each step felt heavy, as if I were carrying stones on my shoulders. The streets were crowded, but I could only see figures, as if the entire city had become a blur. The weight of that revelation crushed me. I sat down on a park bench and began to cry uncontrollably. Abandonment had already scarred me as a child, but now I knew it hadn't been an accident or an oversight. It had been a choice, and that was too cruel to bear. The questions came like sharp knives. What had I done to deserve this? Why would a child be left alone in a hospital? Had I never been truly loved? Each doubt cut deeper, and the wound from the past opened even more intensely. I tried to take a deep breath, but no air seemed to enter. The memories of that room came back like a nightmare. The cold bed, the nurse's button, the rain-covered window. Only now, every detail was accompanied by the knowledge that it had all been intentional. The people around me hurried past, unaware that on that park bench, I was falling apart inside. The world kept spinning, but mine had stopped. And for the first time, I felt I had to choose. Either carry this pain alone forever, or begin seeking answers directly from the one who hurt me. And that's when a decision began to grow within me. Still fragile, but impossible to ignore. I would have to confront my family, even if it destroyed me forever. I spent days trying to process what I had discovered. Every time I remembered the doctor's words, my stomach churned. I knew I couldn't carry this secret alone. I needed to confront my family. I needed to look them in the eye and hear the truth come out of their mouths. The drive to my parents' house seemed endless. Every mile brought me closer to a pain I could no longer avoid. Childhood memories came back in flashes. The silent dinner table, the cold stares, the ignored questions. It was as if all these moments were building up to this confrontation. When I arrived, the door slowly opened and my mother appeared. Her aged face looked tired, but her eyes still held that same distant glow I'd known since childhood. She smiled slightly, unaware of the turmoil I was carrying. I entered without saying much, inhaling the familiar scent of the house. Every piece of furniture seemed an accomplice to the silence that had haunted me for years. I sat at the table and, in a firm voice, said, "I know what you did to me in the hospital." The impact was immediate. My father, who was in the living room, froze, and the air seemed to freeze. My mother tried to cover it up, asking what I was talking about, but I didn't back down. The doctor told me, "You left me there on purpose." My voice trembled, but my resolve didn't. It was time to break decades of silence. The silence that followed was unbearable. My parents looked at each other, as if searching for an invisible way out of the situation. My heart pounded like a drum, waiting for any answer. But what came was even more cruel. Denial. My mother crossed her arms and said, "You're making things up. You must have misunderstood." My father remained silent, simply looking away. Their attempt to suppress the truth hurt me even more, because it wasn't just the past that hurt. It was their refusal to acknowledge it in the present. I pounded the table, tears burning in my eyes. "Don't lie to me anymore. I spent years wondering what I did wrong. I spent nights crying, thinking I didn't deserve love. And now you want to tell me it's all a lie?" My voice echoed through the house like a scream trapped for decades. My mother began to cry, but her tears were no comfort. They were the tears of someone who knows they've been caught but doesn't yet have the courage to confess. My father, his voice low, simply said, "It was complicated. You wouldn't understand." Those words were like knives. They knew. They always knew. I realized, in that instant, that the pact of silence that had begun years ago still held. They would rather see me torn apart than admit the truth out loud. And that only fueled my desire to dig deeper, to wrest from them every piece of the secret they were hiding. It was at that moment that I understood. This confrontation was just the beginning. The truth lay buried even deeper, and I was willing to go to the end to find it. After the denial, the atmosphere in the house became suffocating. The air felt too heavy to breathe, as if each unspoken word weighed down our bodies. I looked at my parents' faces and saw fear, not love. The fear that the truth would finally come out. My mother trembled, clutching her hands together. Her eyes, red from crying, avoided mine. My father remained motionless, as if caught in a trap he himself had helped to create. That scene said more than 1,000 words. They were to blame. Their silence was like a veiled confession. I knew I was close to uncovering everything, but I also sensed something even darker lurking beneath the surface. It wasn't just abandonment. There was a hidden motive, a motive they deemed powerful enough to justify the unforgivable. My heart pounded with anger and anticipation. I wouldn't leave without answers. I'd already carried too much pain, too much emptiness, and now it was time to bring light where there was only shadow. They owed me that, even if the truth was unbearable. Then, in a firm voice, I said, "If you don't tell me, I'll find out myself, and when I do, there's no going back." The threat made my mother shiver. It was in that instant that I realized the cracks in the silence were beginning to open. My father sighed deeply, running his hands over his face. The entire room seemed frozen in time. He looked at me with a weariness I'd never seen before and murmured, "The decision wasn't easy. You were very sick, and there were things you couldn't know." Those words stabbed me like knives. Very sick? Does that justify abandoning me? My voice was sharp, laced with angry tears. My mother finally broke the silence, saying, "We thought it would be best for you and everyone." But she didn't finish the sentence, as if afraid to say it out loud. My mind spiraled. What could be so terrible as to justify abandoning a child in a hospital? It made no sense. Each answer brought more questions, and each hesitation only fueled my anger. I slammed my fist on the table again, hard. "Better for whom? Better how? You need to tell me everything now." My heart felt like it was exploding in my chest, and my hands were shaking as if my entire body were made of fury. It was then that my mother burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "If you find out, you'll never look at us the same way again." Those words chilled my blood. The secret wasn't just painful, it was devastating. And in that moment, through sobs and broken looks, I knew I was about to hear the truth that could change my entire life. The entire room seemed to close in on me. My mother's crying echoed like an ancient lament, and my father, his gaze lost, finally stood up. He walked to the bookshelf, opened a hidden drawer, and took out an envelope yellowed with age. His hands trembled as he placed it on the table. "It's all here," he said, his voice hoarse, barely audible. I stared at the envelope like someone staring at a bomb about to explode. Part of me wanted to open it immediately, but another part feared I wouldn't be able to handle what was inside. My parents looked at each other, and I realized this was the secret they'd kept their entire lives. With hesitant fingers, I tore the seal and began pulling out the papers. They were medical reports, signatures, and records dating back to the time of my hospitalization. At the top, in cold, impersonal letters, was my name followed by words I'd never heard before. Patient legally abandoned in hospital custody. Tears welled up uncontrollably. It wasn't just the memory of a wounded child. It was there, written, official, stamped. They had left me consciously, documented. My entire body shook and I felt as if I were falling into an endless abyss. I looked up at them and screamed, "You discarded me like I was nothing! You signed papers to get rid of me!" My mother wept silently, but my father just lowered his head, unable to look at me. The anger and pain inside me mingled in a whirlwind that felt like it was suffocating me. It was then, through sobs, that my mother finally spoke. "We didn't leave you because we didn't love you. We left you because we thought you wouldn't come back, and we couldn't bear to see you die." Those words shattered my soul. My breath caught. What she had said seemed to make no sense, yet at the same time it carried a heavy weight. I stared at my mother, pleading with her eyes for an explanation, and she continued, her voice breaking. "Back then, the doctor said you wouldn't survive, that your illness was too serious. We couldn't stay to see you go." My heart ached like never before. I was just a child, fragile, fighting for my life, and instead of support, I received abandonment. My entire body burned with rage and despair. "So you left me to die alone? Is that it? You chose not to fight for me?" My voice was broken but firm. My mother shook her head in denial, crying harder with each word. "We didn't have the strength. We thought if we walked away, the pain would be less. It was cowardice, I know, but we couldn't bear to watch the end." It was a raw, shame-filled confession, and at the same time a punch to my chest. My father finally spoke, his voice heavy. "We believed the doctors. They said it was only a matter of days. When you survived, we didn't know how to go back. We were afraid to face you, afraid to explain the inexplicable." The silence that followed was suffocating, almost deadly. I trembled with anger, but also with sadness. They had abandoned me not out of lack of love, but out of fear, a cowardly fear that had cost me my entire childhood. Knowing this didn't heal the wound, but it finally explained the scar. I wasn't disposable. I was just the memory of a pain they couldn't face. Tears streamed down my face, and for the first time in years, I managed to breathe deeply. The truth had come to light, but there was still a knot in my chest. How could I forgive the unforgivable? How could I rebuild something on such deep ruins? This was the battle I still had to face. After that revelation, I remained silent for long minutes. My body trembled, but not from the cold. It was as if every cell was in shock. I had survived a battle everyone believed lost, and yet the reward for my survival was growing up alone, marked by the absence of those who should have fought with me. I looked at them and saw two broken people, but I also saw my tormentors. They were my parents, but they were also responsible for the deepest scars on my soul. The mixture of love and hate burned within me, a fire impossible to extinguish. How could I face these two truths at the same time? The doctor was right. They had left me on purpose, but now I understood that the reason was fear, not a lack of love. This, however, didn't make the pain any less. On the contrary, it was almost worse. They loved me, but they weren't able to love me when I needed it most. My mother came closer, kneeling before me. Her hands held mine, and I could feel the trembling in her fingers. "You are stronger than all of us combined," she said, sobbing. "You survived when no one believed. You were our salvation, but also our biggest mistake." Those words tore me apart. I didn't want to be seen as a mistake. I wanted to be a daughter. I wanted to have had a normal childhood, with hugs, support, and the warmth of a family. But instead, they gave me silence. They gave me ghosts. They gave me the unbearable weight of believing I was unloved. In that moment, I realized that survival, for me, had always been a burden. I hadn't just survived the disease, I'd survived the abandonment, the silence, the rejection, and the strength they saw in me wasn't a gift. It was the result of being left alone to face the impossible. The room was awash in tears and confessions, but inside me, something was exploding. It was the pent-up rage of decades, the pent-up scream of a forgotten child, the need to finally be heard. I slammed my fist on the table and said, "You destroyed my childhood. You turned me into someone who never believed I deserved love. How can you expect me to forgive that?" My mother burst into tears, her eyes pleading. "We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we need it to keep breathing." My father, for the first time, let the tears fall. He leaned closer and said, "I spent years running away from you, because I saw in your eyes the memory of our cowardice. But you're right. There are no excuses anymore. My chest ached, as if it were on fire. I didn't know if I could forgive them, but I knew I needed to release everything that was suffocating me. I cried out every hurt, every sleepless night, every time I felt invisible. The words came out like knives, but also like release. It was the moment the child inside me finally spoke. My parents listened, without interrupting, without trying to defend themselves. And in the silence that followed, I realized the power had shifted. For the first time, I was no longer the defenseless daughter, but the woman demanding respect. They stood before me, shattered, and I was the mirror of their shame. It was then that something unexpected happened. My mother got up, went to an old cabinet, and brought out a dusty box. "I kept this because I couldn't throw it away," she said, placing it in front of me. I opened the box with trembling hands and found drawings, small notes from doctors, a torn photo of me as a child in the hospital. Tears streamed down my face. There were fragments of the past I'd never seen before, proof that, even though they'd abandoned me physically, they'd never been able to completely erase me. It was contradictory, painful, but also revealing. Their love had always existed, but it had been crushed by fear. In that moment, I realized the truth had reached its highest point. There were no more secrets, only exposed pain. The climax of my story wasn't just hearing the truth, it was feeling that, even shattered, I finally had my voice. I held the torn photo between my fingers, staring at my childish face, so fragile and alone. That image wasn't just a portrait, it was an open wound, a cruel reminder of abandonment. My tears wet the paper, blending present and past in a single moment of pain. I looked at my parents, who stared at me with desperate eyes, filled with guilt and regret. Part of me wanted to scream that there would never be forgiveness, that nothing could erase the void they'd created. But another, quieter part just wanted to rest, to let the weight finally fall away. My mother tried to hold my hand, but hesitated halfway. It was as if she was afraid I would reject her, afraid my touch would confirm how much she had failed. I realized then that fear had been the guiding thread of their lives. Fear of loss, fear of suffering, fear of love. My father, in tears, whispered, "If I could turn back time, I would have stayed. I would have held your hand until the very last second, no matter what." His words were sincere, but also belated. Regret doesn't bring back childhood, doesn't bring back lonely nights. And I was caught between two choices, carrying this pain like an eternal chain, or accepting that they, as human as I, were also victims of their own cowardice. But accepting wasn't forgetting, much less forgiving. It was simply acknowledging that I couldn't live forever with that wound. I took a deep breath and said, my voice breaking, "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I know I don't want to live as a prisoner of this pain anymore." Those words weren't forgiveness, but they were the first crack in the wall that separated me from freedom. In the days that followed, I returned home carrying the box of memories and a broken heart. Nothing had been completely resolved, but the truth had been exposed, and that was already a victory. I was no longer the child lost in questions. Now I had answers, even if they were painful. I spent hours staring at the objects in the box. Every drawing, every medical paper, every piece of memory was proof that my story hadn't been completely erased. I existed, I fought, I survived. And even though my parents had abandoned me, my strength had blossomed amidst their abandonment. I began writing about my experience, recording every memory, every tear, every revelation. It was my way of transforming pain into something greater, into something that could give meaning to the emptiness. Perhaps telling my story was also a way of reclaiming the child within me. My parents tried to reconnect, but I kept my distance. I needed time. I needed space to understand who I was beyond the hurt. They carried regret, but I carried scars, and scars take time to fade. As I wrote, I realized I wasn't just venting. I was rebuilding myself. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide what to do with it. And that choice, for the first time, was in my hands, not theirs. And that's how I realized my life wouldn't be defined by the hospital, nor by abandonment. It would be defined by the strength I found to survive alone, and the courage I had to face the truth. I wasn't an eternal victim. I was a survivor. Getting here wasn't easy. It had been years of silence, decades of unanswered questions, and a lifetime marked by abandonment. But now, finally, the truth was out in the open. I knew who I was. I knew what had happened. And most of all, I knew I had survived it all. Looking back still hurts, but it also shows me how strong I was. I survived the illness, the fear, the empty hospital, and the weight of a family shattered by its own terror. I carry deep scars, but each one tells the story of a child who refused to give up. Today, I no longer see that hospital room as a prison. I see it as the place where I discovered my own strength. My parents failed me, it's true, but I didn't fail myself. I resisted, even when no one believed I could. This made me who I am. The anger still exists. Forgiveness has not yet arrived, but I no longer live chained to the past. I chose to move forward, rebuild from the ruins, and give a voice to that girl who cried alone in her cold bed. My story is not only one of pain, it is also one of rebirth. And if I've learned anything from all this, it's that the truth, no matter how cruel, always sets you free. Carrying lies and secrets only increases the pain. Facing reality hurts, but it also opens the door to new beginnings. Today, I carry on with the scars, but also with courage. If this story touched you, I ask from the bottom of my heart, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment about where you're listening from. It'll be amazing to read each comment and know that this message reached you.